But until you really dissect that dynamic of a child victim involved in prostitution, especially one who's pimp controlled, only then will you really understand all the aspects of exploitation, vulnerability, and manipulation going on. I was born and raised in South Jersey, and I was raised in a suburban area. It was really kind of a sheltered town. We weren't near very many cities or very much culture except the culture of tourism. South Jersey, we were near the beaches. So my parents, who were really great people, and I love them very much. As parents of a young child, they were a little preoccupied. They were a little distracted with going out with their friends. And so I spent a lot of time with a family. I spent a lot of time with my dad's brother's family. I think in general, the adults around me weren't paying attention, or they weren't really equipped to pay attention to know what to look for if something was not going right. So there was a cousin who was sexually abusing me, and it was what was more traumatic about the experience for me was feeling helpless. It was I would beg my parents not to leave me at this house, but they would go out for the weekend, and so they would leave me there as a babysitter. And for some reason, as a child, you don't speak up about those things. I don't know why. I try to think back, like, why didn't I just say what was going on? And I really don't know why I didn't just come out and say that was happening. Maybe it's because I wasn't so sure that it was right or wrong. I just knew that I didn't like it, and I didn't want it to happen anymore. So I would beg not to be left there. Out of that situation was born of just a deep anger in me, a resentment towards adults, towards caretakers, the people in charge. And I also didn't understand that he didn't have the right to do this to me, right? So that's starting under the age of 10. Those are the elements in my life. But I was so stressed out by my cousin, who by this point, my parents finally agreed not to leave me there, but they invited him to be the babysitter because he volunteered. So then it was happening in the home. And I was very, very stressed out. And I started to have like anxiety tics. And I thought I was going crazy. At like age 9 or 10, I literally thought I was going crazy. So I went to my mom and I told her what was going on. And it was very difficult for me to tell her. I just sort of beat around the bush a little bit about what was going on. But she understood, and she said that he would never come over here again. He would never babysit again. I would never go over there. I wouldn't see him at all. But she told me never to speak of it again. So I was left feeling glad that the abuse was going to stop, but I was also left feeling confused, like, did I do something wrong? A social worker came to school and gave the good touch, bad touch talk. And they invited whoever wanted to come back and talk to the social workers would get lollipops or something. So, of course, we all agreed because also we wanted to get out of class. I think that was the bigger enticement. So we all took our turns leaving class, and I went to see the social worker, and I said, I think this is a great idea, what y'all are doing. You know, there's lots of kids out there that need this because this happened to me in the past. And so I think it's good that you're going out there and talking to kids who were like me. And so, of course, everything sort of stopped after that, and they took a lot of interest in what I was saying, and they started asking me a lot of questions, and then I realized I had made a mistake. by saying something, because they were asking a lot of questions. And then when I started to clam up, they said, "We have to go home and confront your parents about this," which threw me into a panic, because like I said, at home, we do not talk about issues. We don't take issues outside of the home. And I was very, very worried about how my parents would react. So I went home and I told them what I had done, and they were very angry, and they told me to lie about it, to say that I was lying. And so the social workers showed up that night, or the next night, I think it was that night, and they stood at the door and they asked questions, and I said I had made the whole thing up. And then from that day forward, just that anger that I had inside from the abuse came forward, and I didn't have the knowledge or strength or understanding to talk about my abuse, but I understood how to be angry about it. And I showed that anger to my teachers, to my parents, to everyone around me. I changed. I became a different kid. Our lack of validation plays an important role, because after I was trafficked, I went into a psychiatric hospital. And it was nearly 20 years later that I got to look at those medical files. And I saw that I was diagnosed with traits of borderline personality disorder, which is, I've done a lot of research on that, and I've learned that lack of validation for your feelings as a child can create those traits towards borderline personality disorder. And so I believe I did have borderline personality disorder as a teenager, and I think that the traits were very strong starting at 10, 11, and 12. And I think that it played a huge role in my trafficking. Borderline personality disorder. So I don't trust my own feelings, and I'm losing a self-identity, right? And I'm clinging to people. 5th grade was a time frame that was very sad and lonely, and it was very sad during 5th grade. And I met this girl. Her name was Kelly. She became my best friend. And Kelly was fun, and she was funny, and she was outgoing, and I wanted to be just like Kelly. So I dressed like Kelly, I acted like Kelly. I really became pretty obsessed with being with Kelly. So 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, 6th grade was wonderful. Even though I acted out towards adults, and adults thought I was a hellion, I was having the time of my life with my friends, because that was my priority. 7th and 8th grade, Kelly started to get new friends, and that's when I started to get very stressed out. And I started to go through depression and anxiety and all kinds of things, and I was a complete wreck by the end of 8th grade when she had officially started hanging out with other people, and that's when I met my trafficker at the mall. So we were walking in the mall, and I'm straggling behind my friends. My friends they're up ahead, and they're paying attention to whatever they're looking at and each other, whereas I was paying attention to the people around me. And I was really looking into the faces of strangers. I was looking for some sort of a connection. Now that I was losing Kelly, I felt like I was completely disconnected from the world. And so I looked around to other people. And by that point, I was pretty used to people not looking back at me and just sort of, if we made eye contact, looking away. But then I noticed that there was this guy staring at me. And when I waited for him to look away, he motioned for me to come over to him. And I turned around to see if he was talking to somebody else, and there was no one there. So when I looked back at him, he motioned for me to come over again. And I shook my head no. And I was just surprised, and I was looking around to see if anybody noticed this exchange between us, and nobody noticed. And he was still staring at me, and my friends were still ignoring me, and I thought, I want to know what he wants. Now, there's a reason that he picked me out of the crowd and not the others. I think that while traffickers or pimps will go to a mall and target any young female or young male, whoever they're used to preying upon, it is a certain type of girl that he's looking for within that group. And I was that kind of girl that he was looking for. He started calling me that night, and we talked for about 2 weeks. And he didn't come on strong, like sexually or pushing me to run away. He was just like a friend. He started to get to know my interests, maybe my weaknesses, what made me tick, what made me worry. And he told me things like I was pretty enough to be a model, which I didn't believe, but it was really nice to hear. I was infatuated with MTV musicians, and I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a songwriter, and I wanted to be musicians. So he said that he knew musicians all over the country, and that he could take me to famous cities, and he could get me into famous dance clubs, and I could become an actress or a songwriter. And by the end of the 2 weeks, it sounded like a great idea. What I didn't know at that time was that the person that I had been talking to for the past 2 weeks was a completely different man from the guy at the mall. I actually didn't know that until about 20 years later when I got my case files. In my case files, I learned that there was another guy who spent that time with me on the phone, and that makes a lot of sense to me now, because when I showed up at the mall to meet the guy again, he was very different. He was not friendly. He was very withdrawn and authoritative, and I was very nervous around him, and I thought I had done something wrong. Never did I think it was a completely different person. I thought that I had run away wrong. So from there, this guy took me to a motel, and there was a woman there who also looked like she was in her early 20s, maybe 18, 19 too. She was beautiful. I was uncomfortable with this guy. He said to her to get me ready, and then I knew that something was amiss. But I started to backtrack. Like, could I figure out how to get back to the mall? I was really bad with directions, and I was pretty sure I wouldn't know how to get back to the mall. And the motel I noticed was on the way to Atlantic City. I was on some highway. But he left. He told her to get me ready, and then he left. And then this woman took over, and she turned on MTV, and she talked to me about music, and she pulled out her clothes, and it was girl time. And she bonded with me, and I bonded with her immediately, because that's what I was looking for, a connection with someone. The pimp came back after a couple of hours, and he said he had to go over the rules with me. And he said things like, I have to take $200 an hour, talk to this kind of guy, that kind of guy. He gave me a new name, a new birthday, and he was throwing all this information at me very quickly. And I had to repeat it back to him. He's asking me to repeat these things back, and there was no time for me to ask any questions. And he wasn't asking me how I felt, like, are you okay with this? Is this what I signed up for? No, he was telling me what I was going to do now. From a very early age, back to the early childhood sexual abuse, I learned, to be complacent to those around me, to sort of deal with what was happening to me. I never learned to fight. So she called a taxi cab, and on the way to Atlantic City, She told me that not to worry. Like she gave me more instruction. She gave me condoms. She said not to worry. All the guys do not want to have sex, and that was not true. She took me to Atlantic City, dropped us, the cab dropped us off on Pacific Avenue. And looking back, I believe we were in a section that was known for child prostitutes or girls available for prostitution, because a guy came along and picked me up so quickly. He walked past us and asked me how old I was, and he began to haggle with the woman. I didn't say very much. They haggled on a price, and she told him to get a taxi cab, or she told him to get a car, pick me up directly, take me directly to a hotel. And in the hotel room, he told me that I reminded him of his granddaughter. So I think he knew what he was looking for. He knew that there were children out there, and that's what he was looking for. I actually thought that I was empowered until the following day when the pimp raped me. And again, when that happened, I felt like it was my fault. I was the one who chose to run away. This is the life that I have now, and I have to deal with it. I don't know if the word rape came to mind. I just know that I didn't want it. I didn't want what had just happened to me, and I felt like I had no other options. So I went out the following night with the girl again, and an officer approached me on the street at some point during the night. And he asked me how old I was. And I was given a speech to say if that came up. And I gave the speech, and the officer started to walk away from me. And I thought, at that point, I knew I wasn't empowered. I knew the pimp was the one in control. I knew that I wasn't in control. And so I called out to this officer and I asked, what if I was under 18? And what I meant by that was, what are my options? And he turned around and he arrested me. He handcuffed me, took me to the station, searched me, booked me, and threatened me with juvenile detention until I gave up my real name. I didn't want to go back home. That was the point of running away. I needed some other options. The only reason I gave up my real name was because I was afraid of getting beat up in juvenile detention, because he told me that would happen if I didn't shape up and cooperate. They handed me over to my parents, wearing the same clothes the traffickers put on me that day, and I was sent home with no counseling, no transition whatsoever, no direction, no understanding of what had just happened to me. So this is the reason why I'm speaking out today, because this is still happening to girls. They're still being arrested, and they're still being sent either to jail or somewhere else without any transition, any instruction about any understanding of what just happened to them. So I was sent home with my parents, who totally didn't understand what just happened to me either. And so I was grounded. I was sent to my room. And I know that they were angry with me. They were angry with me for the whole thing, for being found in Atlantic City involved in prostitution. And they were angry with me for not cooperating with the police. It gave especially my father, the impression that what they found me doing was my choice. If I wasn't agreeing to cooperate, and I wasn't cooperating because of the way I was treated by this officer who was not trained to deal with a child victim involved in prostitution. So I was feeling pretty down and out. And my parents were mad at me, and I know that they viewed me as a prostitute, which was a very negative thing that I was feeling. And so I attempted suicide after being in my room for a few days. I honestly felt that was my only option, and it was not something I was doing to get attention. I was very serious. This landed me in a psychiatric facility, luckily, because it offered me a little bit of a transition. However, the therapist there had no training in commercial sexual exploitation of children. Had they had training, they would know things like she was probably sexually abused as a child. But I really believe had I been in contact with a service provider who understood commercial sexual exploitation of children, things could have been different, because I struggled all through high school and in my 20s. I struggled with drug addiction to sort of self-medicate. I struggled with really terrible relationships, domestic violence in my 20s especially, because I had really low self-esteem. I believed that I had chosen to become a prostitute, and that I carried that dark, terrible secret from my past with me. And when these relationships went sour, I didn't have the strength to walk away from them, because I thought, well, nobody's going to love me because of what happened to me in the past. So I stayed with these guys as it got worse and worse. So I think things could have been easier sooner with the right treatment. My teachers helped keep me on a straight enough path where I wound up in going to college. Like, my teachers really helped me in that way, professionally and academically. But personally and emotionally, I was struggling. And that didn't change until I met another survivor, which was almost 20 years later. It was 2009. I saw a documentary on, I think, HBO about human trafficking in India. And so that caught my attention, and I sort of was watching it, and this girl was going in and saving this woman was going in and saving girls who were being held against their will in brothels. And I thought, gosh, that seems like a lot like what happened to me a long time ago. A lot of these kids were lured into the brothel by other false promises. So I looked up human trafficking in America, and I found Children of the Night in California, and all these girls were at Children of the Night, and they had gone through exactly what I went through. It was just, I was floored that not only that this happened to other people, but that it was still happening. I just had no idea. So that's when I started looking into other programs, and I wanted to volunteer, and I met Tina Front, who runs Courtney's House in DC. And hearing her story, and then hearing the stories of teenage girls, finally everything fell into place for me, and I understood what happened. I understood it wasn't my fault. And over the past couple of years, I've just been piecing together all these different pieces.